All right, for today's notes, we are looking at our final exponent rule, and that deals with rational exponents. So just to kind of give you a better idea of what's going on here, I want to talk about the word rational. All right, so in math, the really important part of this word is ratio, right? These are ratios. These are rational exponents. If we really wanted to use a word that you're more familiar with, we could have just called this fractional exponents, right? Because a ratio is a fraction, all right? So this is what you can do if you are ever given an exponent, right, like over here, that is not a whole number, right? It's a fraction. Okay, so before we really get going, let's just make sure that we're using the right words here. The top number in a fraction, remember, we call the numerator. And the bottom number in a fraction we call the denominator. All right, so you're not going to have a huge context understanding of what's going on here until we kind of finish this week's lessons. So what I really want you to focus on during these notes is just the pattern of what's going on here, right? So the denominator, n, goes into this spot right here. That's kind of, it's not in front of the square root sign, the radical sign. It's called the index, and that's something we haven't talked about before. It's probably a word you've never heard before. And then the top number, right, the numerator, stays with the base and is now just a whole number exponent. All right, so let's quickly jot these down. So this number here was the numerator, so I'm going to write the numerator stays with the base and is now a whole number exponent. It's kind of a little paragraph there. All right, now I'm going to do a different color. This is my way of making sure you understand this is very different. This number here, so we're going to say what was the denominator is now your index. Again, you don't really know what index means yet. Just think about it. It's this little number right there kind of tucked into the radical sign. Okay? Actually, I should probably point that out too. This we're calling the radical, right? I'm not going to call it the square root sign anymore because it is no longer always a square root. Okay, here we go. We're going to do a couple of examples, and then these practice problems, maybe I'll just show you the answers. And you can pause the video before I do that if you want to try them on your own. So we're going to focus over here on the left side. I'm going to skip the first one. We're going to come back to that at the end. Okay, we're going to focus here on number 2. We're going to start. So remember that my rule looks like this. All right, so here is my base, right? So my base is still my base, right? But now it's inside a radical if I'm dealing with this fractional exponent. Okay, the top number, right, just like the top number, becomes an exponent for my base. So the 2 is going to go right here. All right, and then the denominator, n, is now my index. So this number needs to go right here, and we're going to put a 3. And that's it. That's all I have to do. This is not really solving anything. It's honestly not even really simplifying anything. You're just transforming a fractional exponent into its radical form. Okay? All right, let's try number 3. In number 3, we're going backwards. So I already have the radical sign, which means that when I transform my term, I'm going to have some kind of fraction for an exponent. And you just need to figure out which numbers go where. Well, in this case, we only have the number 7. And that's my index number, which remember becomes my denominator. So for my denominator now, we know this is really a 7. Okay. Now what's going to go in my numerator? Well, in order to answer this question, you have to remember that if I don't have an exponent written, there really is a 1 there. Okay, and so that's what we have to use for our numerator. We just have to remember that fact and throw a 1 up there. Remember, it has to be a fraction. That's the only thing we have to remember, is it has to be a fraction if we're trying to transform it from its radical form. All right, let's see number 4. Okay, again, number 4, we already have a radical, which means that I'm transforming it to a fractional exponent, right, a rational exponent. And now we just have to follow the formula. Okay, the index is my denominator. So the number that goes down there is 4. And the number that goes up top, in this case, we do have 1 given to us. And we're going to have that be the 7, right? The exponent up here becomes my numerator. So that's going to be 7. This is my rational exponent form. Okay, we're going to go back to the first one. X to the power of 1/2. So we have a fractional exponent, which means this time I do need to transform it with a radical. We're going to follow the pattern that we've been talking about. So this bottom number becomes my index. And then my top number is an exponent on my base. So we're going to put the 1 here. Now, I want to simplify this. In this case, we actually don't have to write the number 2. And that's the only time we don't have to write it. In fact, I'm going to make myself a little note. Okay? You don't have to write the index number. If it is a 2. Everything else you have to write it. Like for instance, this 3 absolutely had to be there. Okay, if it's a 2 though, it doesn't have to be. And the reason for this is, what have you always called this from up until now? You've always called this symbol right here a square root, because by default that is a square root. In other words, if we're calling it a square root, it's because we don't see a number here, but it is a 2, right? A square root. In this case down below, this would not have been a square root, this would have been a cubic root, right? Do you kind of hear the difference there? And we'll get more into this at the end of the week, so don't worry if you're not feeling too strong about it. Okay, over on the right, I'm not going to explain these. If you want to do them, pause the video now, and then go ahead and watch it after you've done these, all right? All right, so your answers here are going to be 6 for my index, x to the power of 1. We don't really have to write the 1, right? I don't know why I wrote it again. So this is my answer. Okay, here, there's a 1 here, don't forget. So I'm going to have 1 over 5. Here I already have a fraction. Don't forget, if there's no number as an index, it's a 2. So we have x to the 1/2. And then finally, this is going to be the 6th root. We have x to the power of 5. Okay, there we go. We will talk more about radicals at the end of this week.